For 32 years, I've tended the gardens at Harrington Estate. My calloused hands have sculpted every hedge, nurtured every rare orchid in the greenhouse, and designed each seasonal display that has graced the covers of architectural magazines. The Harringtons trusted no one else with their prized botanical collection, a trust that extended only to the plants, never to the man who made them flourish. The family never bothered to learn that my name is Gabriel Mercer, not Gabe the gardener. They never discovered that the quiet man in mud-stained work clothes held 3 advanced degrees in botany and landscape architecture. Most importantly, they never suspected that I'd been systematically acquiring ownership of the land beneath their magnificent estate, piece by precious piece, for over 3 decades. I came to Harrington Estate in 1993, not seeking employment but pursuing research. My doctoral work at Cornell focused on rare ornamental species, and the Harrington collection was legendary in academic circles. I'd written to request access for my dissertation research, but received no response. The Harringtons rarely bothered with academics unless they came from suitable families. Undeterred, I applied for a groundskeeper position instead. Victor Harrington Sr., impressed by my knowledge of his rare specimens, hired me immediately. He assumed my expertise came from practical experience rather than formal education, and I never corrected him. The position offered unlimited access to one of the finest private botanical collections in the country, exactly what I needed. I intended to stay only until my research was complete. That changed the day I overheard a conversation between Victor Sr. and his attorney in the greenhouse, where they thought they were alone. The indigenous claim to the eastern parcel is nonsense, Victor was saying, examining a rare black orchid I'd coaxed into bloom. Their documentation is centuries old and mostly oral tradition. Our paperwork is properly filed with the county. The paperwork you created in 1967, the attorney reminded him gently. If anyone investigated thoroughly, no one will. Victor interrupted. We've donated enough to the Historical Society to ensure their cooperation. Besides, that land has been Harrington property for 3 generations now. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I remained motionless behind a large palm, absorbing their words. The Harringtons had apparently seized land from the Onondaga people, falsified documentation, and maintained their claim through influence and money. As the grandson of an Onondaga woman who had told me stories of lost ancestral lands, this revelation struck me like a physical blow. That evening, I visited my grandmother on the reservation. I showed her a map of the Harrington estate, and her eyes filled with tears as she pointed to the eastern woodlands. Our sacred springs, she whispered, where our people gathered for centuries before the Europeans came. My brief research position transformed into a mission spanning decades. I continued working as head gardener, earning Victor Sr.'s complete trust with my botanical expertise. When he died in 2001, his son Victor Jr. inherited the estate and retained my services, though he had little interest in the gardens beyond their value in impressing business associates. Meanwhile, I began my careful, methodical plan. I lived simply in the gardener's cottage provided by the Harringtons, saving most of my salary. I completed my doctorate through evening and weekend work, publishing under a different name to avoid attracting the Harringtons' attention. When my grandmother passed away, she left me her modest savings, which I dedicated entirely to my cause. The first opportunity came in 2005, when a 5-acre parcel adjoining the eastern edge of the estate went into foreclosure. Though officially listed as separate from Harrington land, I recognized it from my grandmother's descriptions as part of the original contested territory. I purchased it through a shell company created with the help of a lawyer friend from the reservation. Victor Jr. never noticed. The land was wooded and undeveloped, irrelevant to his business interests. I continued maintaining his gardens while quietly investigating the complex history of the property's boundaries. What I discovered was a patchwork of questionable acquisitions. The original Harrington estate had been much smaller, expanded through decades of strategic purchases, many conducted under ethically dubious circumstances during periods of economic hardship. Most crucially, I learned that the estate wasn't a single property but a collection of adjoining parcels with separate deeds, some of which had never been properly consolidated. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, Victor Jr. faced substantial losses. Though the Harringtons remained wealthy, their cash flow suffered. Victor began selling off peripheral parcels of the estate to maintain his lavish lifestyle without liquidating his more valuable investments. These sales created my opportunity. Working through various shell companies and indigenous community investment trusts, I purchased 3 key parcels between 2009 and 2012. Victor never connected these transactions to his gardener. The purchases were handled by attorneys, and the buying entities appeared unrelated. By 2015, I controlled nearly 40% of what had once been Harrington land, including the eastern woodland with the sacred springs. Yet my most significant acquisition came unexpectedly. Victor Jr. had a gambling problem, one he kept hidden from his family and business associates. During a weekend in Monaco in 2017, he accumulated substantial debts to the wrong people. Desperate for quick cash, he secretly sold the heart of the estate, the 20 acres containing the main house, formal gardens, and greenhouse complex, to a private equity firm, with a leaseback agreement allowing him to continue residing there while maintaining appearances. When that private equity firm faced bankruptcy in 2020, I was waiting. Through careful financial maneuvering and the support of several indigenous investment cooperatives, I acquired the central property at auction. The transaction was complex enough that Victor never realized who now held his mortgage. For the next 5 years, I continued as the Harrington gardener, watching Victor's finances deteriorate further. His leaseback payments became increasingly delayed. He began selling art and antiques to maintain the illusion of wealth. But the gardens, my gardens, remained immaculate. Featured regularly in luxury magazines that paid substantial licensing fees, which now came to my management companies rather than to Victor. The final act began when Victor announced plans to host an extravagant gala celebrating the Harrington family's 150 years of distinguished ownership of the estate. The event would feature prominent politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. It would also serve as the announcement of Victor's most ambitious plan, converting part of the sacred eastern woodland into an exclusive members-only golf course. Construction equipment arrived the week before the gala. The operators presented permits and authorizations bearing Victor's signature. I watched from the greenhouse as they approached the ancient trees at the woodland's edge. Then I made a phone call. Within 30 minutes, tribal representatives arrived with local law enforcement and court-ordered injunctions. The construction crews were instructed to vacate immediately. A confused Victor came storming across the lawn, demanding explanations. "This is private property," he shouted at the tribal attorney. "I have every right to develop my land." "Actually, Mr. Harrington," the attorney replied calmly, "this parcel hasn't been your property since 2011. It belongs to the Onondaga Nation Land Reclamation Trust." Victor's face flushed crimson. "That's absurd. My family has owned this entire estate for generations." I chose that moment to step forward, removing my work gloves. "Not anymore, Victor." He barely glanced at me. "Gabe, call our attorneys immediately. These people are trespassing." "My name is Dr. Gabriel Mercer," I said quietly, "and they're not trespassing. I invited them." Something in my tone finally captured his full attention. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in 20 years. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. The tribal attorney handed him a thick folder of legal documents. "These papers detail the current ownership of what you call Harrington Estate," she explained. "The eastern woodland belongs to the Onondaga Nation. The remaining parcels, including the main house where you reside, belong to various entities controlled by Dr. Mercer." Victor flipped through the papers, his hands shaking. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "You've been making lease payments to my company for 5 years, Victor," I said. "Those payments are now 12 months in arrears. I've been patient, but your announced development plan has forced my hand." The color drained from his face. "You're evicting me? Before my gala?" "The gala can proceed," I said. "In fact, I insist upon it. The guest list includes numerous individuals who should witness what I'm about to announce." The following Saturday, Harrington Estate was transformed for the gala. Hundreds of guests in formal attire wandered the gardens I had perfected over decades. String quartets played on the terraces. Champagne flowed freely, though not at Victor's expense. I had personally covered the costs after his credit was declined by the caterers. At precisely 9 o'clock, Victor clinked his glass for attention, somehow maintaining his practiced smile despite the catastrophe unfolding in his life. He welcomed everyone to the historic Harrington Estate and began a self-congratulatory speech about his family's legacy of stewardship. I waited until he mentioned the planned golf course development before stepping onto the small stage. The microphone was easily relinquished by the confused Victor when several tribal elders joined me. "Distinguished guests," I began, "my name is Dr. Gabriel Mercer. For 32 years, I've been introduced at events like this, when I was acknowledged at all, as the gardener. Tonight, I'm speaking to you as the principal owner of what will now be called Ganondagan Gardens, a cooperative cultural and botanical preservation project." The crowd murmured in confusion. Victor attempted to reclaim the microphone, but security, no longer in his employ, gently restrained him. I continued, The eastern woodland of this property contains springs sacred to the Onondaga people. That land has now been returned to its rightful stewards. The main estate will become a public botanical garden and indigenous cultural center, open to all visitors rather than just the privileged few. As comprehension dawned on the assembled guests, Victor finally lost his composure. "He was my gardener," he shouted. "Just the gardener." I met his gaze calmly. "I was never just your gardener, Victor. I was the caretaker of something far more valuable than you realized. While you saw only status symbols and development opportunities, I saw living history and cultural heritage worth preserving." In the stunned silence that followed, I invited the tribal elders to speak. They shared brief stories of their ancestral connection to the land, stories my grandmother had once shared with me. When they finished, I announced that the formal gardens and greenhouse collections would be preserved under expert care, including educational programs for underserved communities. As the guests departed, whispering among themselves about the evening's dramatic revelations, Victor remained on the terrace, staring vacantly at the gardens that had never truly belonged to him. "You have 2 weeks to vacate the premises," I informed him quietly. "I've arranged temporary housing for you in the village. It's modest but comfortable." 32 years, he murmured, finally comprehending the scope of what had happened. "You worked for my family for 32 years just to take our land?" "Not to take it," I corrected him, "to return it. There's a difference that your grandfather never understood when he falsified those documents in 1967. Victor looked up sharply. "You knew about that?" "I knew everything, Victor. Your family saw only the gardener's clothes, never the man wearing them. That was your mistake." The following morning, I walked the grounds at dawn, as I had done every day for 3 decades. The dew-covered roses, the precisely trimmed hedges, the rare specimens in the greenhouse, all exactly as they should be. For the first time, I entered the main house through the front door rather than the service entrance. In the grand entrance hall, I passed the portrait of Victor Harrington Sr., his imperious gaze now seeming less confident. Perhaps he understood now, wherever he was, that ownership isn't about papers filed in county offices or names engraved on silver markers. True ownership comes from connection, from care, from the patient nurturing of something greater than oneself. I opened the French doors and stepped onto the main terrace, surveying the gardens that had been my life's work. Soon, these paths would be filled with visitors of all backgrounds. Children from the reservation would learn about their ancestral plants. Botanical researchers would have full access to the collections. As the morning sun illuminated the greenhouse glass, I smiled at the irony that had apparently escaped 3 generations of Harringtons. They had paid me, decade after decade, to nurture the very evidence of their fraudulent claim. Every ancient tree I preserved, every heirloom plant I propagated, strengthened the case for the land's original stewardship. The Harringtons had always believed that wealth meant never having to look closely at those who served them. They never imagined that the man in soil-stained clothes, invisible despite being in plain sight for 32 years, would be the architect of their downfall and the guardian of something far more precious than their family name.